The topic that I thought we could talk about today, which seems apropos, is finding peace. So it seems like often when we hear the word peace talked about, we immediately look outside of ourselves. You know, the big issues. You know, if they could just get it settled out there, then I could relax. You know, I wouldn't need to be quite so anxious about, I don't know, extinction of the species or demise of the planet or violence against others. I mean, there's plenty of things to be concerned about out there, and the sense is that unless we're directly involved in those somehow, we're either a climate scientist or a politician or someone with vast wealth that can influence policy, that it somehow those issues seem so vast that it seems to be beyond our ability to do anything about. Ever feel like that? Sort of like a bit helpless in the face of challenges that seem to be out there these days? But in a sense, when we view those issues as if they were somehow independently existing, that they just were out there in the universe somewhere as independent issues, we sort of deprive ourselves from seeing that they're not independent at all. They're really a function of humanity's collective view of the world, view of themselves, how that expresses in total. So that it's not like they exist in a vacuum, just as an idea or a concept that has consequences, but it's actually the result of all of us, expressing life from our individual viewpoint, and the net result, the net consensus of all of that is what we see, the world at large, right? So, I mean, we can, point fingers at certain political parties or, certain ideologies or certain ethnicities or certain races or, on and on. Making distinctions as if that was, an identifiable cause. I remember Eckhart Tolle had a retreat up at Omega just days after 9/11, and somebody, of course, asked him, how can that level of violence happen? And the point that he made was that it was a matter of degree, that those terrorists believed in their actions sufficiently to actually carry them out, believed in their own certainty, believed in the certainty of the people that were encouraging them to carry out that act. But Eckhart's point was that it was just a matter of degree. That all of us, when we see differences, when we judge, when we're certain, when we believe in the absolute rightness of our opinions, that maybe we don't act on them. Maybe we just act rude or say something mean to somebody else or dismiss somebody else or judge somebody else. But the distinction between that and flying an airplane into a building, Eckhart's point was just it was a matter of degree. Same mental position, same degree of belief I'm right and they're wrong, and this means justifies that end. So we don't fly airplanes into buildings, but that mental position is not all that different. And we can have ideas about how things can change. If I could relax, if only, someone would take care of that issue. Someone else. If they just did what I know is right, then that would be resolved. And we seem to have great faith in big conclusions like that. The First World War was advertised as the war to end all wars. Didn't quite prove to be true. It was just violence on top of violence. Not that, the war shouldn't have been fought, but the idea that it would be fought to create peace doesn't work. I mean, we can look at the wars that we fought in the Middle East. I remember in 1971, Muslims still liked Americans, and you could travel overland to India. And I remember driving through Afghanistan, feeling totally safe, feeling just that the people there were just proud, independent. I felt totally safe walking alone in the back streets of Kabul, through the bazaars. These old Afghans coming out of the desert with their 19th century muskets and standing on the side watching you go by. Felt totally comfortable. And somehow we believed that we could bomb the country and earn their love and respect. But it's just, violence begets violence. So, the belief that somehow the means justify, a noble desire like peace or democracy or whatever the end point is, if we believe that we can go about that through a means that isn't peaceful, not respectful of other people's culture and society and history, etc., it will be doomed to failure. Right? So it's relatively easy to see that on a political scale, global scale, etc., like we've just been talking about. But as it becomes a little closer to home, it's maybe not quite as easy to look at. So that when we sort of pull our attention back from maybe global issues that are, beyond our capacity to deal with directly as a global issue, that we don't happen to be in a position to change things at that level. But the question then comes back to, how am I in my day-to-day activities? If I go into the grocery store, do I go into the grocery store and relate to the checkout clerk as a real person? Is there, I don't know, just mutual respect? Is there kindness there? Is there appreciation there? Are we interacting from a place of peace ourselves? In Zen they talk a lot about transmission, like it's a special thing that only Zen masters know how to do. Not really doing, but anyway. But we all transmit, right, all the time. You can feel it if you walk into a room and the person is a genuinely happy person. You feel good. You walk into the room and somebody's deeply depressed. There's a heaviness in the room. So that's what I mean by transmission. It's just that we're all doing it all the time. That, we may say something, but, as humans, we're all intelligent enough to pick up what may not be expressed in words, but, what the person is actually feeling, actually presenting. So what does that look like? What is, our responsibility in that case? What's our level of respect for the other person? What is the way that, what's the energy that we're bringing into the world? So that's something we can do something about, right? Something that is within our control. It is the possibility to choose that, to choose to recognize that the means of whatever the interaction is with another person or with nature, with the environment. If we believe that what's critical is the end and the means, do what's necessary. A few people get hurt or bruised along the way. But it's exactly the same movement. It's just on a personal scale. It's not that different. It's just, again, a matter of degree. And in one case, we can feel helpless about it. Another case, we can actually recognize our presence in the world, and what does that look like? And we can go down in deeper and deeper layers, right? We can act, friendly and open-hearted and, have this demeanor. But if we're doing it from the point of, well, I'm doing this as a spiritual practice, right? Feel the difference? It's not that I'm just doing it because that's my an expression of my deepest nature. It's like, okay, I'm doing this as a practice. I'm doing this to be nonviolent. I'm doing this to be, a good religious person. I'm doing this because this is what, my spiritual practice says I should be doing. Feel the difference? It's like, it's no longer just a free gift. It's no longer coming just out of generosity. There's an ulterior motive there. It's like, oh, this will be good for who? Me. Right? I'll gain merit from my spiritual practice, So there's a payoff there. It's no longer just a generous outpouring of oneself. It's a strategy. So where, who is that benefiting? Is it that the other person doesn't actually feel that? You can see that play out when we feel like, we should really help this group of people. But from what mentality are we doing that? Is are we first concerned with, what the issue is, and then, if there's anything I can do to help, and can I do anything to help without making things worse, or can I do something to help without diminishing the self-respect of the other person? It starts to get a little more tricky than just, I'm doing it because I know it's the right thing to do and they should be happy that I'm doing it for them. Right? We can see that this whole area can be very delicate. So when we're interacting, it can be really, really instructive to just sense into not so much the means, not so much the rationale of why I'm doing this thing, or how much this will benefit this other group of people that I'm doing it for, but really, really sense into the motivations for doing it oneself, right? Does that make sense at all? Because that can be very different. It can be very subtle. Yeah, we can believe that we're acting, to improve my karma, right? Gain merit. If I gain enough merit, then there's a payoff there somewhere. Right? But if we're doing something to gain merit, to earn our way into heaven, to become enlightened, that we feel like somehow that action has to accrue to me. The first assumption is somehow there's something lacking here that I have to earn. So that's the first area to question. So I'm not worthy now, but if I dedicate myself to service and helping people, then maybe I'll sort of overcome my debt. At least get back to zero, right? There's something about in this country, right? I don't know whether it's original sin or what, but it's somehow, for a lot of people, it's like, we start off in a hole that we never even knew we got into, how that happened, and somehow we have to earn our way out of it. There's not a free pass there, that, somehow there's a deficiency there that we have to prove ourselves somehow, or earn some level of okayness. What if that wasn't true? That would change things, huh? What if you found out one day that enlightenment had nothing to do with merit? I mean, it's also not true that you therefore become irresponsible. Yeah, almost the reverse is actually true, that you realize that there's once you recognize what you really are, then there is much, much more responsibility than there ever was before for your actions. But at that point, they're not coming out of, well, I should do this because, that's what my practice dictates. It should do this because, I'll earn merit, I'll improve my karma, etc. It's not done for any particular reason. It's just done because that's the obvious, appropriate thing to do. So even in our day-to-day activities, especially in our day-to-day activities, it's not like they're inconsequential, right? They're an opportunity to really look within from where am I acting at this moment? From where are these words that are coming out of my mouth coming from at this moment? Are they in alignment with what I most deeply believe, understand? Are they dismissive? Are they overbearing? Are they judgmental? We have an opportunity every day to really look at this. This spiritual practice isn't in a box somewhere else separated from the rest of life. Life is actually where we get to, really practice, really be involved in it. There's not two separate things. There's not spirituality and worldliness. It's all, whatever it is, it's all one thing. It's miraculous enough that there's even one thing happening, much less two, Yeah. So this is an opportunity just every day, in whatever the interaction is with other people especially, just to see where that's coming from in ourselves. And one way to do that is, maybe it's just as you walk up to somebody and, before the first words are exchanged, just to, in a sense, just to connect with the other person. Here's another manifestation of existence right here in front of me. Connect on that level and then go from there. All right? You connect on that level, and whatever happens after that is going to be much more sincere, much more real, authentic, vulnerable, all those things. If we walk up to somebody and then we immediately try to conceptualize the other person, what do they look like? How are they dressed? Am I going to like this person or not? What we usually do. We can just approach it just from a different sense, see what happens. Because in a very real sense, the other person, no matter who it is actually a manifestation of the same life source that we are. Right? we tend to ignore that and look at the differences. Look at the superficialities of it. Their beliefs, their opinions, whether we agree with them, whether we don't. What they look like. Do I want to go out with them? Whatever it is. We tend to look at it from that perspective and ignore the most fundamental thing, which is here's another being living through the same life with the same challenges, different circumstances, of course, but the same, wins and losses, the same ups and downs. So we tend to ignore that and focus on the froth on the surface. So it's just like we did in the meditation this morning, where we just settled in and came back to that simple awareness that is present. And we can, if we recognize that in ourselves as being fundamental, is the other person not already aware? So if we can see that as our own essential nature, can we not see it also in the other person? So where are we going to relate to and from? What's essential or what's... And it's fine. I don't mean then, we need to walk up to another person and I'm relating from my essential nature. It's not like that. I mean, you can still have a conversation and everything, but there's an understanding that deep down that there's a connection at a different level than you may be talking about. So it doesn't have to be weird that way. It just we can still relate to each other. I mean, it's sort of the convention of the world to have that kind of conversation. But if we get caught up in it, then we get focused on the differences, the opinions, the beliefs. All the minute things that we like or don't like maybe about the other person, and we totally ignore whatever the deeper connection is. So we can still have a conversation, but we can see that the beliefs and the ideas and opinions and experiences and the personality of this other person is a result of their upbringing, right? Their experiences, their parents that they had, the culture they were born into, maybe the country they were raised in, the economic circumstances. All of those contribute to one's ideas about the world and about themselves at some point. So if we're relating on that level, we're relating on the circumstantial level. And we can see in ourselves the difficulty that we ourselves may have had in sort of getting through some of our own conditioning, right? Anybody had an easy time with that? I mean, some of us, may have had easier circumstances than others, clearly. No doubt. But even, if, one's upbringing was relatively free of trauma, abuse. Doesn't mean that life is necessarily a breeze, right? It's still challenging. So if we can see that even with our own conditioning, the challenges that we've faced, and the amount of work that it takes to see through some of our own conditioning, are we not willing to grant the other person that same benefit of the doubt? Maybe the other person that you're talking to or watching on TV hasn't devoted themselves to maybe the degree that you have to see through their conditioning, which again is a result of conditioning, right? And so you can see that too, but you, at the same time, notice that it is still life expressing itself as that. And who are we to say that it should? So even to say that, the other person shouldn't be acting like that, can you sense into the arrogance of that? That I know how the other person should be acting, without maybe fully recognizing their upbringing, their conditioning, their, current circumstances, what's going on in their life at this moment. But somehow we feel entitled to, judge them for their behavior. It's not to say that, if I had a choice, I'd prefer to be around this kind of behavior and not so much around this kind of behavior. That's natural, right? We can, it's not like we, lose any sense of discrimination that way. But if we find ourselves in this situation or in front of this person, are we willing to remain present for that? And if we're not, why not? Even in that situation, is there something that entitles us to be rude or dismissive or judgmental or... So there's a difference between seeing, it's not like some behavior isn't noticed as being, the result of, deep, heavy conditioning. We can see that. But there's a difference between seeing that, recognizing it, and judging it. Judging the person because of their behavior. You see the difference? If we believe that the person is the behavior, that's the sum total of the person, how they behave, what they think, what their opinion is, that's who they are. We can think that if that's who we think we are, right? If what I am is limited to what I believe, my storyline, my history, my current situation, my hopes, my dreams, my fears, my desires, that whole package. That's what I am. If we believe that about ourselves, it's easy to believe it about the other person. And then we're judging and relating on the level of froth, right? So we ignore that their fundamental beingness, aliveness, manifestation of creation. We ignore that and we decide to relate based on my conditioning and your conditioning. And surprise, surprise, there's conflict. Right? Because what's important at that point is defense of my conditioning. You know, if I believe that's who I am and someone says, you know, you're a fool, Don, you know, there's something that reacts if that's what I believe that I am. You know, and they've noticed it and judged it and, you know, and then that lands somewhere, because if I believe that's what I am, this belief about opinions and ideas and all of that, then there's conflict. But if, you know, if the same person, you know, says you're a fool, but there's a difference between acting unintentionally like a fool or making a mistake, and being a fool as the totality of yourself, right? You know, being angry, being depressed, being judgmental, being envious, being, you know, if that's who you are, but it's not, right? That's all of that is conditioned. All of that's conditioned. But it's not who we are. When we sensed in first thing this morning of just, you know, when we sort of bypass the conceptual mind, all the opinions about who we are, and just go direct to perceptions and what's present. And we find out that what's present every time we take the time to stop and look is this awareness. And that awareness is unconditioned. You know, so this whole journey isn't a resolution of our conditioning. You know, it sounds like it should be, right? You know, that what I need to do is fix my conditioning. Well, especially the ones I don't like, right? The other part, you know, it's okay. But we're still working on that level, and that's a lifelong process. It's not that we can't, you know, round off a few rough edges. That's fine. But, you know, as long as we're defining ourselves as that's who we are, and we're going to improve our way to peace and happiness, well, we got a long road. So the other alternative is just to really look closely to see what is most essential about ourselves. You know, and we can look and see that, you know, ideas that we have about ourselves change over time. Opinions change. Our bodies change. Circumstances, health, wealth, relationships, possessions, names can change over time, right? All of that changes. Bodies age. So when we really get serious about looking at what we actually are, is it any of those things that we're going to bet the farm on? That's who I really am. This idea, this belief system, that's who I am. Forever and ever, I know I'm right now. I finally got the right set of beliefs, and I'm sticking to them. But we can look at all of those are subject to change. But the one thing that's not subject to change is just this simple awareness, just this aliveness, right? Anybody not aware right now? So I'm not talking about, special spiritual awareness. I'm not talking about elevated awareness. And, sometimes in Eastern religions, they talk about pure awareness. And what I take that to be is just awareness prior to content, right? Just what's already aware prior to whatever content arises within awareness, including thought, including feeling, including experiences, memories, etc. So just that very simple awareness that's totally functioning in everyone right now. Everyone. Almost everybody dismisses it because it's not even special, right? Everybody has it. It's there without us trying to hold on to it. You can't attain it. You can't get rid of it. It's just there. But we dismiss it because it's the easiest thing in the world to dismiss. It's at first it appears much less interesting than the objects that are arising in awareness. We can be sitting in awareness and then that cell phone, text, okay, yeah. Our fascination immediately goes there. So the reason I'm talking about awareness here is to see if we recognize in ourselves that the fundamental nature of that, then we can also see that it's fully operational already in the other person. The other person might not give a hoot about it, right? Might not have never thought about it. It's okay. Awareness doesn't mind, actually. It's still functional. It's not like, the divine being of all, says, he doesn't value awareness, we're going to penalize that person. So that's actually the reason I said before that this awakening, enlightenment, isn't a merit-based activity. Because it's just a recognition of what we already are, as simple as that. But it's the last thing that we want to recognize. And part of it, I think, is just, our mind, first of all, our mind wanting to stay in firm control. I've always been your best friend, you can trust me on this. Don't do anything rash. I'll be the judge of what's right and wrong. And, this idea of awareness, which is beyond my understanding as a mental conceptual mind, that's dangerous territory. Don't go there. Right? Mind, the conceptualizing mind wants to stay in control and will do anything to stay in control. And we're the ones that gave it that authority. There was a time in all of our lives, first year and a half or so of our lives, that the brain wasn't doing the conceptualizing thing, the thing where it talks to itself in sentences that runs on analog fashion, one after another. There's a year and a half of our lives that it didn't have that capacity. Had to learn how to do that. Before that, it was alive, present, fully engaged, curious, in awe of life, learning every second. But words weren't happening yet. So we've all had that experience of being alive, being in the world, without that mental freight train happening. So life, who's that French philosopher, Descartes, said, "I think, therefore I am," right? Real famous. No, totally false. I mean, even to say that, there are times in all of our lives when thought has ceased. Right? Maybe not for a long time. Maybe yes. When you've been surprised by something, somebody tells a joke, suddenly your mind doesn't know what to do with it, just stops for a fraction of a second. Walking along, a bird suddenly flies out of the bush right up in front of you. In that moment, your mind stops. And then, like a half a second later, it's like, oh, it's a bird. We convert it into a mental concept. So the reason I'm talking about this is that there is life, there's aliveness in this awareness. And if we can recognize that in ourselves, we can recognize it in the other person. And then we get to the interesting question of this awareness that I can recognize here. Is that my personal awareness? Or is it just awareness? What we were all taught in school is that our brains generate consciousness. That's what we're talking about, right? These brain cells. I haven't figured that out at all, how that happens. Other than there's a lot of them there and they must be up to something. But that's actually one of the fundamental questions of this whole journey, you could say, is that awareness that I can experience. Is it generated from me, from this body-mind? Or is it what's actually enlivening these body-minds? You see the difference? If it's what's enlivening this body-minds, is the awareness that I'm experiencing any different than the awareness that you're experiencing? Is there any boundary? My awareness ends there, and Kathy's awareness starts there and goes over that way. Is that how it works? Or is it just the same awareness being expressed here, being expressed there? Do we know? So the purpose of asking these questions isn't to come up with a conceptual answer or belief. That's actually less than useful, right? If we don't know the answer to some of these questions, that's actually a pretty good place to start. You sense that? if we don't know, we're sort of open to finding out. We're open to, what may be revealed to us. We're open to being curious about it. Like, I wonder if that could be true. I wonder where this awareness originates from, or where it starts or ends, or it's sort of curious, right? So you can just sort of be open to how things really work, rather than what anybody else says about them, what we were taught about them. Feels bigger, right? More expansive. So it's really okay not to know. And we weren't taught that. We were taught to have an answer. Asked a question, Johnny, you're supposed to have an answer. But life is bigger than that. So if we ask a question that we don't, when we stop and really think about it, we don't actually know. If we try to come up with a conceptual answer to put it back in the box, and then the mind can relax. Oh, okay, I know what that is now. I know what I am. I'm awareness. So problem solved, mission accomplished, right? But we can see that that attempt by the mind to put it in a box just limits it. So the same sort of rules, same sort of observations that we talked about in terms of relating to other people that we may run into day to day, we can also use for ourselves, right? We can be nice to ourselves. We can be compassionate. Doesn't mean that we don't see things that need to be seen, but if we recognize that the things that need to be seen are on the surface still, they're not essentially who we are, it gives us a little breathing room between sort of what's observing and what's being looked at. If I've got a pattern of behavior, I don't know. Let's say it's just being judgmental. If I believe that my behavior defines in total what I am, I can't really look at that clearly. I can't look at it objectively. But if I am at least open to the idea that, maybe what I am is other than that. Maybe what I am is just this sense of aliveness, this awareness. Is that awareness willing to look at judgmental behavior? The awareness doesn't have any skin in the game. Why? Because it's not of the same dimension. It's not within the conditioned me. It's outside of that. So when we really get what this awareness is, it may seem a little flimsy at first, like, yeah, I'd like something more solid, like this. I'd like this to be essentially who I am. And that's an aspect of who I am, but it's not the entirety of it, right? When we can see that what's really there is awareness expressing itself through these body minds. You could also say spirit having a human experience. There's different ways of talking about it. Right? But from the point of view of awareness, looking back at the conditioning and seeing that the conditioning is a matter of circumstances. A matter of chance, a matter of what family we were born into, what experiences we've had. The awareness doesn't have a problem with that. it doesn't mean that it therefore just runs on like a, on a, car without a driver. It doesn't mean that. It actually allows us to look at how this body-mind functions more objectively. When we recognize it's not fundamentally who we are, it allows us to look at it. It's much like if you were a doctor, it's easier to do surgery on the other person than it is on yourself, right? So in a sense, it's like that. It's more objective. You can make clearer decisions. You could look at, how the behavior affects the other person, how it, eventually, works out in a situation. What the result of that behavior is, and we can see, okay, that's worthy of attention. I'll put that there. So we can, look at these different levels of how we look at peace. We can see it as big picture, peace in the world, but we can see that as not independently existing. It is a function of all of us expressing our level of understanding, and the net result looks like it looks, right? But what we do have immediate control over is how we are in the world day to day, what that looks like. And again, are we expressing our deepest understanding? Or are we just putting a good face forward? Are we acting out our fears? We have that choice, What are we transmitting? And we can also look, within, what are we running away from? What are we afraid to look at? What are we willing to acknowledge? What are we willing to explore? What questions are we willing to ask? When we can begin to see that we can ask any question we want, we can challenge any belief that we might have. Truth isn't in danger. Truth isn't dependent on our belief in it or not. Right? What's ultimately true, however we want to define that, isn't dependent on whether we believe it or not, right? It's not that vulnerable. Right? It's what's true. And the same goes for ourselves. What's true within us isn't dependent on what questions we ask for ourselves, what areas of ourselves we're willing to explore. We can look at all of that. I'm not saying it's easy. Sometimes it can be really hard. Sometimes the most difficult ones are the things that we believe are most true about ourselves and the world and how things work. But to allow ourselves to really look at things clearly, not just on the surface, but just to really sort of dive deep into it to see what that source really is. We can take something like I don't know. We can take like climate change, big issue, right? Threatens our species. So it didn't just happen. I mean, it didn't just, there wasn't just a few corporations or a few politicians that sort of pushed things in this direction, and that's the result of it. I mean, it's accelerating, but the root cause of it has been around for a long time. We've just gotten to the technological abilities to actually implement our mental concepts about what will make me happier, which is more, bigger, better. Gross domestic product measure of our country. So again, it comes back to something really deep-seated in all of us. It's like, it's very similar to, I'm not really worthy now, but if I improve myself, if I meditate for 20 years, then I'll be qualified, right? Maybe, But it's actually of quite similar movement, like the sense of not quite satisfied now, but, if I got a better job, changed relationships, moved into another house, adopted another belief system, changed the channel on my Netflix subscription. So it's like, a little dissatisfied now, but maybe more, different, better. So there's always this movement. And that movement, you might notice, is always away from ourselves. So we're never willing to look at, is there peace present here now? We dismiss that one out of hand. Something has to change in order for me to feel peaceful. Out in the world, at work, my neighbor. If everything out there was just to the way I like it, then I'd be at peace. I'd be happy. Okay? Anybody waiting for that to happen? Trying to manipulate things, get it just the way you want. But the last place we're willing to look is here, now, as is. Last place. Couldn't be there. I'm certain of it. Again, we come back to certainty, right? And close the aperture. I know the answer already. But when we looked at just that present awareness at the beginning this morning, if we really sensed into that, was there a sense of peace there? Without changing anything, right? All the external situations are unchanged. But we were willing just to set aside our anxieties and fears and hopes and dreams and all that, just for a moment, just to settle in to see what's actually here. And if we can touch into that and recognize that is home base, that's actually what frees us to function freely in the world. Right? If we recognize that what we truly are is unconditioned already, is at peace already. The awareness, just by the nature of it, isn't subject to harm. Doesn't mean difficult things don't happen, but awareness is present for those two. Awareness has been present for the entire show, right? Good, bad, ugly. If it wasn't present, you'd have no memory of it at all. So awareness isn't a fair weather friend. It's there. It's not other than who you are, so it's not going anywhere. But when we recognize that, it allows us, it allows us to be more forgiving of our own conditioning, other people's conditioning. If we can recognize how we've been judgmental in the past, and we run into somebody else that's judgmental in the present moment, we can respond from understanding, understanding the difficulty of seeing through one's own conditioning. And maybe we see a little bit more clearly than the other person, but isn't that, we're also more functional than a 2-year-old child. That doesn't mean that, we should be dismissive of the 2-year-old child, right? It's just seeing, yes, we're all in the process of learning to fully actualize who we are as living beings, and to really see that clearly. And that movement out in the world has an impact. Has vastly more impact than, watching the TV and agonizing over the nightly news. That actually has a negative impact. I'm not saying that, going out and, doing what we can in terms of social justice and actually taking actions or talking to people, that can have an effect, especially if we do it from a place of peace, right? We're not doing it in antagonistic fashion to the, those ignorant people over there. We're doing it out of a deeper recognition of our connection, not only connection, our unity with all forms of expression. We can see that, we can do that with other people, we can do that with nature. If we truly see that, what we are is one expression, this is another expression of the same thing, right? So when we really see that, we don't have to have we don't have to try not to abuse it any more than we have to try not to stick our hands in boiling water. We wouldn't think to do it. Wouldn't think to abuse it. Not because there's merit involved or because our spiritual practice says so. It's just because there's that deep recognition that what that is not other than what I am and what everybody else is. That's the connection. That's the unity. And if we can relate to our own conditioned structure that way, we can relate to other people's conditioned structure that way, from a deeper place. That has power. power to influence, the apparent big issues that we feel helpless about.